With that in mind, we will be transitioning to our popular culture segment. Helfra, would you kindly? With pleasure, or Hots. Starpath Media has once again rocked the landscape of popular culture with a recent announcement made across several media platforms and on their Galnet site. The constant chart topper Blood and Glory will feature a new contestant from the uncontacted civilization that calls Sol 3 its home. Fans of the show are already speculating about the details of the contestant, like their background, how their race came to be picked out of the myriad of pre-FTL civilizations, and so on. I think you're forgetting something, Helfra. My apologies. I neglected to mention that the number of new contestants is actually 2. The pre-FTL primitive will be joined by a lucky someone from the more civilized races of the stars. Although their body language or their facial expression didn't show it, the first news anchor's words were dripping with disdain. I don't know about you, Helfra, but I think pre-FTL primitive is a fancy way of saying dead weight. My heart and mind goes out to whoever gets stuck with that savage. William had woken up in a bare gray cell with little to no furniture. After spending an indeterminate amount of time in his cell and getting briefed on his obligations to his owners, much to his horror, he was drugged and placed in some sort of transport vehicle with a bag over his head and his arms, legs, restrained, preventing him from thrashing around. It didn't help that there was someone or something in the back of the vehicle with him, and worst of all, they had started monologuing. You are my everything, my ticket to great riches, fat, bonuses, everything, but our business relationship can be mutually beneficial. You see, if you put on a good show, you'll be the talk of the entire galaxy, at least this side of it. You will become the idol of both males and females, and everyone in between or outside the spectrum. Women will clamor for you, men will hate you, they will envy you. I've paved the first few steps of your road to stardom. All I want from you is the goodwill to pave the rest of the way with me. You have no idea how much I had to hassle the executives to greenlight this. I know you're scared, but there is no better position to be in than this one, I assure you. By the way, remember these pictures I asked you to rank based on how attractive you found them? Oh, them. William remembered the pictures from the screen on the wall all too well. They were the most relieving sight for obvious reasons. Tasteful modeling shots of a plethora of women from many races, most of mammalian nature, but there was a single model that was not. Of course you do. That dark blue skin really caught your attention, didn't it? So much so that you gave it a 10 out of 10 while others were lucky to get a 6 or 7. Well, guess what? I pulled some strings. Turns out her parents were indebted to some lending firm loosely associated with our group. We're talking close partners with a subsidiary. Kind of associated. I did this to sweeten our deal. Always good to have some, what do humans call it? Eye candy. Shit, was that person press-ganged into signing into whatever this was? Now he felt extremely bad for ogling at these images. Nevertheless, he had to pay close attention. From what few details he managed to scrounge, he was going to enter some sort of reality TV show. Run by aliens? Nothing too bad. Let's get the basics down. You will enter the arena and you'll see a forest. The forest alone is huge. And if you are quick about it, you can take out the 4 hunters without having to exit it. Truth be said, the arena is huge. Really huge. The jungle is only a part of it. Oh, and one last thing. Try to keep your hands off her for the duration of the match. Keep it in store for after you're done. Whatever happens in the dormitories is none of my business after all. William was dumped in yet another soundproof cell with no furniture and the same mind-numbing shade of gray that haunted him from the moment he first woke up. He hid his face behind his hands as he sat down on the cold floor, rubbing his face. Memories from his past came and went like a slideshow inside his head. He figured this must have been close to what someone that was about to die experienced, their entire life flashing before their eyes. The prick that rambled about making him. A star revealed just how screwed up his situation was. Before they departed, he was expected to kill or be killed like an animal. Eventually, 2 guards came, holding some mean-looking weapons and outfitted in exoskeletons. They really did think of everything. They handed him a bag and ordered him to change at that very moment, the bastards. To his surprise, it was his kit for his job. Not his actual job, but his other secret occupation, the one that brought in most of the dough. His outfit was made for shady dealings. Black ski mask to hide the face, black shades to hide the eyes, black blazer jacket, black shirt. Literally everything was black. The fact that the ensemble happened to look stylish too was unintentional. On his part, not that he complained. William sighed. Now was the time to shine? Oomin paced back and forth. She knew what was coming, more or less. Stand inside the arena, look pretty, and give the audience, the mammalian portion of it, something to ogle at. Something did not bode well for her. She had no business in that arena, and whoever she managed to talk to left her in the dark about the true nature of her work. All she desired was the lump sum of currency she'd get and the promised renegotiation of her family's debts. The former was tempting enough, but she wouldn't have taken up the offer or that odd one-off modeling gig if it wasn't for the latter reward. With the countdown to the next match drawing closer and closer towards the end, she started having second thoughts. Unfortunately, it was too late for her to back off now. She was worried sick and annoyed at the same time. Would it kill them to give her an outfit that wasn't so skimpy? William followed the long tunnel up until a certain point where there was a dead end, stepping on the platform and praying for safety. The platform started ascending before he managed to collect his frenzied thoughts, raising him up to the arena. Its size was a marvel to behold. At least, that's what he would have thought if he hadn't gotten blinded by the lights. The sounds produced in response to his sudden appearance were deafening. Loud music blared all over the arena. The spotlights focusing on him were disorienting, and the voice that boomed all throughout the arena even more so. This is what you have been waiting for. Our newest contestant, brought to you by Starpath Media straight from the backwater planet of Sol 3, hailing from his homeland known as England. It is William Earl of the Gill clan. God, he hated his middle name with a passion. Whether the announcer was feigning excitement or not, he couldn't tell. He couldn't imagine how sick someone had to be to enjoy this. And yet, here they were, watching him. The arena's massive dome blacked out, starting to broadcast the crowd's reaction to him, and it was nothing less than raucous. Back in the days of old, he was an unrepentant thief living a double life, but now there is only life he has to live of blood and glory. Some other spots on the dome blacked out as well, showing the title the producers had bestowed upon him in green letters. True Outlaw. It was written in a language he would not understand under normal circumstances. Before they shoved whatever they shoved inside his body that helped him understand. The crowd cheered again, somehow louder than before. Did you know his second name is the name of a noble rank? I did not. Not until now. Time will tell if today's champion is as noble as their name implies. The arena suddenly went silent. He could see the crowd jumping up and down outside the dome, and yet no sound reached his ears. They must have muted the outside sound. A silent buzz kept coming closer. He turned around only to come face to face with a drone. "How's my champion doing?" What in the ever-loving shit? Oh yes, keep up the profane speech. Some crassness with a little heroism on the side. And our female viewers will line up to get tickets each and every time. Remind me, did I mention someone else joining you? Yeah, still can't believe the one thing everyone has in common are ring girls. Your people have a lot more in common with the starfaring people than they'd like to admit. Either way, you might want to hurry. There's a sizable bounty on both of your heads, and while the hunters will throw at you won't know where you are right away, well, let's just say someone tipped them off to your friends starting. Location! Straight to the jungle you go! William stared at the drone in shock, contemplating what he just heard. He didn't get to dwell on that for long. The sound of horns signaled the start of the match. Motherfucker! He broke out into a dead run, beelining it to where the barren ground gave way to a plethora of trees, thick foliage and greenery. As he ran, one hell of a distressing thought clawed at the back of his head. Had they warned her of this? There was no guarantee they did, most likely letting her wander aimlessly while the hunters closed in on her. He had to find his clueless partner and fast. Damn the producers for manufacturing a damsel in distress scenario. It's immoral as hell and a cliche like no other. This was a horrible mistake. Her subconscious had figured it out earlier, but the conscious part of her mind only began to realize the gravity of the situation once the flechettes started flying in her direction. She kept running, trying and failing to ignore the pain that only kept growing in the back of her leg where one flechette buried itself. The consequences of failing to get away were obvious enough. The bittersweet thought of her family getting compensated for. Her participation after her passing quickly gave way to terror. Her body was getting slower and slower. The blood loss kept getting worse. The cold was creeping in. How long did she have? There was still so much to do, so much to see. She couldn't depart now, not so soon. William homed in on the source of the yelling, hearing two distinct voices. He was not close enough to hear whatever they said. He hastily climbed a steep cliff by stepping and holding onto the rocks. Once he reached the peak, he looked out to the forest ahead. Christ, how large was the artificial forest! His eyes zeroed in on the movement of a blue blur disappearing. Around a tree with two more discernible armed figures clad in black and giving chase, it looked like he found her and two of the so-called hunters. He tried to get down without falling. Fat chance of that happening. All he ended up accomplishing is tripping and rolling down the hill. He landed hard when he reached the jungle floor. Nothing was broken somehow, but his sore body was bruised and in pain, just like his ego. He ran and ran. What little adrenaline was running through his veins, up until now proved potent enough to help his tired legs carry him to where he had last seen them disappear. He slowed down significantly when the voices became audible again. Each step he took while treading lightly brought him closer and closer, until he could almost hear them right next to him. The sight alone made his heart race. The hunters were standing over the unconscious alien. The description matched. He wanted to act, to do something so badly. It looked like they were toying with their food. The plan he was starting to formulate fell apart when they raised her to her knees. He also caught a glimpse of a drone silently flying overhead. The bastards wanted to squeeze as much cheap heat as possible out of her death. Set her up so she's easy to see by the drone, just like that. How should we do it? We fire at the same time. 2 to the chest, 1 for each eye, and finally 1 to the head. This enraged him to no end, throwing caution to the wind and jumping out from the tree he hid behind, charging the one hunter that had their back turned. To him, their weapon flew out of their hands when he crashed into them. Not thinking straight, he kicked the gun away and at the other hunter who had enough time to line up a shot, shooting him in the shoulder. The pain was both excruciating and helpful. Helpful because it finally convinced his lizard brain to begin pumping him with the natural combat drug of adrenaline. William tackled the hunter that shot him to the floor, grabbing their head with both hands and bashing it against the exposed roots of the nearest tree. The second harder bash rendered them unconscious. William elected to turn around and deal with the other hunter until he felt a burning pain on his left buttock. "Arr! You cunt!" He screamed and leaped at the other hunter who was trying to reload after firing off the last loaded cartridge. He wrestled away the gun with some difficulty, shakily standing up and using it as a club to beat the hunter with. When he was done with the broken mess, he stood up and looked to the sky, seeing the drone. Still pissed off, taking aim was a no-brainer. The shot he fired off nailed the drone in one of its rotors, making it plunge to the ground below. He focused again on his fallen teammate. William shook her, no response. He looked her over and spotted the pool of blood around her right leg. Pressure was needed, something to stem the flow of blood, or else there was no chance she'd survive. His belt. He unfastened it and took it off, fastening it around her thigh as tightly as he could. William shook her again, still no response. To say he was getting desperate was an understatement. Desperate times called for desperate measures. This was it. She came from the sea like her people, and just like everyone that came before her, she was going to join the greater sea, free from fear, doubts, pain. She'd fall into the eternal embrace of the Great Mother and the Great Father. Ernan felt her consciousness drifted further, and yet there was something clawing at her, strange sounds coming from beyond. Ake up! So strange. They were unfamiliar, and yet she understood them. It mattered not. She was gone in the other up! That particular voice was getting louder. Who could it be? The souls of her ancestors? A spirit servant of her people's gods? So many questions. The stinging pain brought her back from the brink. Her eyes started opening ever so slightly, glimpsing at the person standing over her and shouting at the top of his lungs. "Wake the hell up!" The open-palmed hand of whoever was shouting came down again, trying and failing to ignore the pain that only kept growing in the back of her leg, where one flechette buried itself. The consequences of failing to get away were obvious enough. The bittersweet thought of her family getting compensated for. Her participation after her passing quickly gave way to terror. Her body was getting slower and slower. The blood loss kept getting worse. The cold was creeping in. How long did she have? There was still so much to do, so much to see. She couldn't depart now, not so soon. William homed in on the source of the yelling, hearing two distinct voices. He was not close enough to hear whatever they said. He hastily climbed a steep cliff by stepping and holding onto the rocks. Once he reached the peak, he looked out to the forest ahead. Christ, how large was the artificial forest? His eyes zeroed in on the movement of a blue blur disappearing. Around a tree with two more discernible armed figures clad in black and giving chase, it looked like he found her and two of the so-called hunters. He tried to get down without falling. Fat chance of that happening. All he ended up accomplishing is tripping and rolling down the hill. He landed hard when he reached the jungle floor. Nothing was broken somehow, but his sore body was bruised and in pain, just like his ego. He ran and ran. What little adrenaline was running through his veins up until now proved potent enough to help his tired legs carry him to where he had last seen them disappear. He slowed down significantly when the voices became audible again. Each step he took while treading lightly brought him closer and closer until he could almost hear them right next to him. The sight alone made his heart race. The hunters were standing over the unconscious alien. The description matched. He wanted to act, to do something so badly. It looked like they were toying with their food. The plan he was starting to formulate fell apart when they raised her to her knees. He also caught a glimpse of a drone silently flying overhead. The bastards wanted to squeeze as much cheap heat as possible out of her death. Set her up so she's easy to see by the drone, just like that. How should we do it? We fire at the same time, 2 to the chest, 1 for each eye, and finally 1 to the head. This enraged him to no end, throwing caution to the wind and jumping out from the tree he hid behind, charging the one hunter that had their back turned. To him, their weapon flew out of their hands when he crashed into them, not thinking straight. He kicked the gun away and at the other hunter, who had enough time to line up a shot, shooting him in the shoulder. The pain was both excruciating and helpful. Helpful because it finally convinced his lizard brain to begin pumping him with the natural combat drug of adrenaline. William tackled the hunter that shot him to the floor, grabbing their head with both hands and bashing it against the exposed roots of the nearest tree. The second, harder bash rendered them unconscious. William elected to turn around and deal with the other hunter until he felt a burning pain on his left buttock. "Are you cunt!" he screamed and leaped at the other hunter who was trying to reload after firing off the last loaded cartridge. He wrestled away the gun with some difficulty, shakily standing up and using it as a club to beat the hunter with. When he was done with the broken mess, he stood up and looked to the sky, seeing the drone. Still pissed off, taking aim was a no-brainer. The shot he fired off nailed the drone in one of its rotors, making it plunge to the ground below. He focused again on his fallen teammate. William shook her, no response. He looked her over and spotted the pool of blood around her right leg. Pressure was needed, something to stem the flow of blood, or else there was no chance she'd survive. His belt. He unfastened it and took it off, fastening it around her thigh as tightly as he could. William shook her again, still no response. To say he was getting desperate was an understatement. Desperate times called for desperate measures. This was it. She came from the sea like her people, and just like everyone that came before her, she was going to join the greater sea, free from fear, doubts, pain. She'd fall into the eternal embrace of the Great Mother and the Great Father. Ernan felt her consciousness drifted further, and yet there was something clawing at her, strange sounds coming from beyond. Ake up! So strange. They were unfamiliar, and yet she understood them. It mattered not. She was gone in the other up. That particular voice was getting louder. Who could it be? The souls of her ancestors. A spirit servant of her people's gods. So many questions. The stinging pain brought her back from the brink. Her eyes started opening ever so slightly, glimpsing at the person standing over her and shouting at the top of his lungs, "Wake the hell up!" striking her and leaving a burning hot pain in her cheek. Their hand came down again. She managed to grab it at the last second. William's breath hitched. He let go of the woman's shoulder. "I thought you were dead, oh brother. Almost lost you, didn't I?" He looked around before hoisting Ernan back on her feet. She yelped in pain, clinging onto him. "Aw, shit. What are we going to do?" Okay. Piggyback or bridal carry? What? The Calernitan stared at him, dumbfounded and dazed. The voice of the announcer returned with a message, and that injected hope into both of their hearts. The hunters better redouble their efforts. The time is almost up, and if the hunted reach one of the exits, it's game over. Gah, screw this. He picked her up, throwing her over his shoulder and grabbing the other gun that was still loaded. Hold on tight back there. He legged it, making a run back the way he came from. Climbing another hill was a no-go. Wading around the trees and through the foliage of the smaller ones was a colossal task. Adrenaline was still as high as it could get for William, erasing some of the extra pain pressuring his left leg brought. Meanwhile, Ernan kept blacking out. The pain was ever present for her, too. She woke up hearing William shouting and taking shots at the tree line. Think you can take me? She blacked out again when she came to the sight of one of the exits. Completely woke her up. Only a little longer. Come on, he told himself, and finally reached the marked area, dropping down to his knees and laying down Ernan as gently as his shaking arms allowed him to. He wheezed, completely out of breath. The horn sounded again, signaling the end of the match. The voice of the announcer returned, and so did those of the frantic crowd cheering for him. What a display of strength, dare I say, bravery personified. How could anyone gaze upon this primitive and not call him virtuous, especially in the face of near certain death? William looked back over his shoulder. The racket of the stadium outside was drowned out when he noticed the collection of black visors dotting the forest he exited. He growled, standing up and turning to face them. He raised his gloved hand after extending one of his arms and raised his middle finger. Here's the universal display of friendship, cocksuckers. After he was done taunting the hunters, he glanced back at Ernan, only now did he properly look at her outfit. No pants instead, she covered himself with 2 long strips of fabric attached to a belt around her waist, essentially wearing what could be charitably described as a loincloth. The situation topside wasn't all that better, only having a cropped jacket that left her abdomen completely exposed, held closed by 3 buttons and a cleavage window that left almost nothing to the imagination. Idiots, dressing you up like a skank, utterly shameless. What? He removed his blazer jacket and handed it over to her. Here, cover yourself up. There's a draft in here. Erman was the last to leave the infirmary, getting driven by an unmarked vehicle to a towering building owned by her current employers. She heeded the driver's instructions and took the elevator to the top floor. She placed the digital key into the card reader, unlocking the door and walking inside. The common room was spacious enough. 2 huge couches and 2 equally large hollow screens. William was sitting right ahead, seemingly entranced by the show he was watching. Last time in Domestic Disasters, the sound of something breaking came from the hollow screen. I can't believe this. So many rotations of staying faithful to our bond, only to come home to this. You are a cruel and abusive woman, always mocking me, always belittling me. You're the reason I gambled our house away. How did you expect me to react when I witnessed you having a threesome with your sister and your cousin? William's IQ face was in actuality frozen in abject disbelief at that war crime of a show his eyes had the misfortune of seeing. But since Orman wasn't knowledgeable of human facial cues, she had no idea. With some light steps, she sat down next to him. His eyes drifted over to her for a few seconds, before glancing away. Willie I am. The strange name rolled off her tongue awkwardly. Words alone cannot describe this. You have my gratitude. Him avoiding eye contact would have annoyed her greatly were she not dressed the way she was forced to. I know your name, so it is only fair you learn of mine. I'm Ernan. I wish we met under different circumstances, he quipped, unwilling to even think of glancing at her. William, I said that words cannot describe my gratitude, so while no one is here to intrude, I want to show my respect. The proper way. She closed the distance between them, getting too close for comfort. Had William not swallowed his voice, she would have gotten a gasp out of him. Their eyes were only a breath apart, and it stayed like this for some time before she withdrew. Our mortal vessels are just one part of us, and the eyes are a window to the other half. By bringing them so close to each other, my soul reached out to yours. Wow, thanks. I understand this isn't a gesture meant for casual use. I appreciate it. William sighed and leaned back, running a hand through his hair. In such a scary new world, where in the hell did a relic like him fit in? Guess he'd find out sooner or later. Until then, he'd wait and see. Darkness? There was only darkness. The streetlights went out a long time ago. The only source of light revealed the monstrosity ambling up and down his neighborhood. He could not begin to understand what it looked like. The fog of his mind would not lift no matter how much he tried to. The kitchenware reminded him of home, the plaid tablecloth of many lunches and suppers spent with family, sometimes even with friends. What was happening? The shrieking drew his attention, coming from somewhere down the road. The voices sounded familiar. He jumped out of the window, unfazed by the broken glass stabbing at his exposed skin. The creature noticed him. It spoke. "You cannot save them." Everything dissolved around him. Even the roving creature merged with the all-encompassing darkness. His parents stood up ahead, partly veiled in shadows. He ran and ran, but they kept getting further and further away. "Ma, Pa, I'm here!" As if on cue, their eyes turned to him, expressions frozen in silent horror. Bit by bit, their skin started melting away, leaving their muscle tissue until that melted away too. Soon there were only their skeletons, and then their bones crumbled to dust before him. No, no! William woke up drenched. In cold sweat, the alarm clock next to him was beeping incessantly. He reached out with his hand to silence it, only for his hand to find nothing to grasp on. He opened his eyes and looked around. The room he was in was painted in black from top to bottom. The beeping he was hearing was in fact coming from an alarm clock sitting on a shelf at the opposite side of the room. Clever bastards. He sat up and wiped the sweat from his forehead, leaping off the bed and running to the alarm clock, silencing it. The first day or night he spent away from that wretched arena, and his first sleep just had to end with a nightmare, of course. There was no sign of the unfortunate soul stuck with him. The living room was empty. The only reason he chose to venture outside was the steel box sitting right in front of the only exit. He didn't know whether to be relieved or surprised. The box opened with a single pull of the handle instead of opening on its own after performing a biometric scan or employing some sort of futuristic tech gimmick. Inside it were several pairs of matching shirts and shorts. The articles of clothing were black with green stripes. Taking the outfit of his partner into account, green and black seemed to be the team colors. Amongst the clothing, he spotted several pairs of underwear and socks. Relief washed over him. He wouldn't be forced to wear the same stuff every day. His eyes scanned the common room. There was no sign of Urman. Must be sleeping in. He didn't blame her. Getting shot more than once took a toll on the man's mind, but almost dying? He couldn't begin to imagine how she must feel. The thought of existing under someone's heel and for someone else's benefit made William angry and a lot more afraid, more than he'd ever admit. This thought alone gnawed at the back of his mind, and the more he dwelled on it, the closer he was coming to breaking something. So he did the only sensible thing. He repressed his anger by occupying himself with something else. More specifically, the rest of the box's contents. Instead of more clothes, he found shampoo, shower gel, canned food, and sandwich ingredients of all things. He took the clothing and threw it on the bed back at his room. He then picked the box up and wandered in the opposite direction. Eventually, finding what passed as the kitchen, he took a closer look at some shelves embedded in the wall. He opened one, and if its size and the existence of dials above these shelves were any indication, he was looking at the local equivalent of an oven. He closed it and laid out the foodstuffs on a nearby countertop. Sorting them out was a problem for near-future William. Present William's current problem was washing away his troubled thoughts and the rank stench that covered him after the conclusion of his debut. When he went back to his room, he noticed a tablet-like device on the nightstand next to his bed. Guess he missed it in his half-asleep state after he was woken up. It was a sleek rectangle, just like any regular tablet, but it didn't fail to impress him when he turned it on. A short animation played, showing the logo of the tablet's brand, the brand of the operating system, and a quick legal disclaimer he got to look at for the entirety of the 2 seconds it took to go away, bringing him to the lock screen. There were many notifications, most of them alerts from what else? Starpath Media, mostly pop culture drivel regarding the match, wasted no time, immediately swiping them to the side once he figured out how to dismiss them. The green dot at the top right of the Messages app piqued his interest. Opening it revealed that he had a message from the damn producer responsible that made him a glorified gladiator in the first place. Anger wasn't the solution. Not now. The situation at hand called for a more civil demeanor. They love you. They really love you. You've been my best investment so far, and it shows. Have a look at this. View attached media. William whistled. Attached to that message were a myriad of pictures, quite a few of them fan art. The majority of them were screenshots of posts referencing his debut. The reactions were mixed, ranging from disdain because he came from a civilization that had not achieved FTL travel yet, to utter surprise that William and Ermin managed to survive the match, to outright declarations of undying love and some others that expressed interest of a more carnal nature. Wow. It almost felt like a fantasy, if only the scenario wasn't so nightmarish to begin with. This came straight from the dreams of tiny lad him, although he'd never admit it. Young Will developed an interest in science fiction after he randomly found the first tome of Fighters of the Last Frontier at the tender age of 13. The library was William's second home in a way. The family computer was a barely functioning mess cobbled together sometime in the 80s, and he wouldn't get to enjoy the benefits of a proper computer until way later, after he reached the age of majority. In the meantime, he busied himself with sci-fi, reading everything there was to read after he found and read everything related to Fotlef first. Just, wow, these people, that is almost tasteful. Almost. The further he scrolled, the more risque the fan art became, wondering what separated the things he witnessed from softcore pornography. One piece in particular shaked him to his core. It depicted him and Ermin with most of their clothing torn off. He was offering her a hand while Ermin was giving him the most blatant bedroom eyes an alien could muster. His heart beat faster. Whether it was because of excitement, anxiety, or both eluded him. William mouthed a "fuck this" under his breath and closed the message, wiping the small amount of sweat that had accumulated on his forehead. It was a fantasy and a nightmare rolled into one. Him getting forced into the role of a gladiator. Alien women that were surprisingly human in the naughty bits craving his presence. The fact he has no idea how long he existed as a human popsicle and what his parents must be feeling. Good Lord, Willem shuddered and typed in a response. All I know is that the freaks I'm supposed to call my fans are making a lot of wrong assumptions about me and her. He put the device down. Not even a single second passed and the producer had replied, I am sure you could make these assumptions a reality. Hint, hint, I am not planning on making any moves on her. I put her in this position for a reason. Not a chance in hell. If I do anything, she'll feel obliged to accept because I saved her damn life. It's your choice in the end of the day, but keep in mind, it can and will get lonely in your position. As if. I've got her by my side. I'll manage. Lonely. In more than one way. You absolute helmet. Is that an insult? I haven't studied your human subculture in a while. Fuck you. The tired Brit hissed in frustration and almost threw the device across the room out of sheer anger, throwing it at his bed at the last second instead. Bollocks to this. I need to wash up. The shower lasted for a while. 1/3 of the time spent in there was actual showering. The other 2/3 consisted of him going to his own mental space, thinking back on everything that had happened. To him, in such a small amount of time, breakfast was next, or lunch, or dinner, or whatever the hell was appropriate for this time of the day. All he can do now is distract himself, so he started whistling a tune to himself. Ermin gasped as she woke up from her own nightmare, the close call she had with death still haunted. The rumble from her stomach signaled the need for sex. Everything else could wait. She walked out of her room. Whoever had designed it accurately recreated the murals with religious significance back home. Too bad it lacked the soul typical of someone that gave a damn about what the murals meant. Her ears picked up a strange sound, something close to a half-assed mating call of an grotto. Her people couldn't decide what this species of pest that was native to the Calernitan homeworld screwed harder. Each other or the crop yield since time immemorial. She snuck towards the source of the sound, peeking her out of the corner she stuck to, only to find the absolute machine of a being that had saved her, swaying from side to side to an imaginary tune. They finally found me, the renegade who had it made. She kept staring in stunned silence until he noticed her, yelling in surprise. Shite! William slipped and fell, the ingredients he was holding flying in the air before landing. On his face with all the grace of a used condom. God damn it, why are you sneaking about? It's not like anyone will jump us in here. His face darkened after mentally calculating the chances of that happening. I think the Salernitan woman made a considerable effort to ignore that distressing thought that slowly buried itself in her mind. I see. Are you preparing a meal? Why, yes, I am. Want me to make you something? I'm sure your stomach can handle this. He awkwardly smiled. Worst thing that can happen is you hugging the crapper for the next hour or so. She stared at him, not knowing how to respond. She had a few things to ask him, and yet she found it hard to open her mouth. Okay, please do, if you want. Ask him why he chose you out of all the other candidates. You guiltless coward. The only reason the Great Mother hasn't embraced you is because of him. I want to ask you something. If it isn't inconvenient, he stopped moving in an instant, piercing eyes landing right on her again. Orman had no idea if she preferred him masked or not. What is it? Just say it. You want to know, don't you? I'm aware you're responsible for me getting hired. What I want to ask is why. I saw some of the other pictures, and they were better suited for the tastes of mammalians like you. Especially when others consider me disfigured. Well, that's a bit harsh, isn't it? I wouldn't call you disfigured. Marked, maybe, but not disfigured. William sighed and scratched his head, trying to fight the heat rising on his face. Sure, there were strong contenders besides you. You happened to tick so many boxes because of you and your... Orman stared down at her chest and then back at William. My venom glands? I don't get the fixation mammalians have with them. Venom glands. Of course it had to be venom glands. Shti, what am I supposed to tell you? That scar on your back sealed the deal, so to speak. There's nothing more attractive to me than a pretty lass with a story to tell. Ermin's voice died in her throat. If she tried to speak, she'd gasp for air. That comment alone was almost enough to send her over the edge. What served as a reminder of her falling victim to intersectarian violence at a young age served as something that enhanced her beauty in the eyes of someone that belonged to an entirely different race. In a twist of irony, what saved her from having to respond was hearing news related to the same show that almost costed Ermin her life. That is indeed true, Helfra. Rumors have started sprouting, claiming the next adversary to face the true outlaw, and his Ortner eel be none other than the Second Temple of the Great Sea. I never counted on seeing them spring back to relevance after so long, stared at the screen in shock. Oh no, oh heavens, no, not the Second Temple. William? Okay, Ermin, try to calm down. What kind of crazies are we going to deal with? He placed a hand on her shoulder, making her flinch. She turned to, look at him. What acts of barbarity should she reveal first? Every denomination of her people's most prominent religion belonged to the First Temple. The only reason there was a Second Temple was because of how monstrous its practices were. The Second Temple practices sapient sacrifice. They saw the first match, and now they want to murder you and then me for getting corrupted by your presence? William's face hardened, staring at the screen with the same intensity his eyes had back when he stared at the thugs that tried to off them. Things just keep getting better, don't they?